to reconcile what Jeremiah said with what Rousseau is saying is that Rousseau might think people would choose liberty, but that doesn't mean that they don't have an interest in liberty.
Gotcha.
And this is, a very crucial idea for Rousseau, is that freedom isn't the same as choice. In Locke, it looks like freedom is being able to choose what you want. In Hobbes, it's even more basic. It's just no physical impediments to choosing what you want. In Rousseau, it's this much more metaphysical idea of choosing in accord with your own nature as a human being. And your own nature is that you are free, that you are perfectible, and that's what it really means to be a human. That's what your true self is. That's what your true will desires. And we're gonna talk about that a lot today. Jeremiah.
How's he differentiating here between what you're interested in, what you want, and what's good for you?
What you're interested in, what you want, and what's good for you.
I feel like he's saying that freedom is something you're interested in, but it may not be what you want or
Right.
what's good for you, but you should still always pursue it,
Yeah.
even though you're only just interested in it. I'm interested
Yeah.
in being a millionaire, but that may not be meaningful or a happy pathway for me
Right.
to pursue the rest of my life. I may not choose to do that.
Yeah.
Make it a better life by doing something else.
So, think about everything he said in the second discourse about outward growth, how it corrupts our desires. It makes us pursue things that leave us ultimately completely unfulfilled. I think that's what he has in mind here, is that we're so influenced by our environment that we often choose things that are contrary to our nature, in the sense that they undermine the good life, like a life worth living, even though they're things that we think that we want in the short run. Money, prestige, status, awards, all this stuff that you see on TV. He says, yeah, sure, pursue all that. And maybe you'll rise to the top of some hierarchy. But even when you're up there, all of these goals and all of these things you were pursuing this whole time, they just came from society. You didn't really think them through. They didn't flow from your nature as a human being. And now that you've got them, you're still miserable. I think that's probably what Rousseau would want to say. Patrick?
Yeah, just, I guess, to me it speaks about like how his system is his eyes, like perfect. Like everyone always has that idea. So within a perfect system, you have the body acting as like one will, one line. And so if you have, like, just say the sovereign's hands moving, like one finger's going the wrong way, then you have an issue where like it's not cohesive. And so if you were to look at this, just say you're doing some drilling and all of a sudden there's some leakage because you're not abiding by regulation that's in place for the betterment of all people, then like you're going against the whole body in each action. So every individual has a need to compel you to do what's right for the whole body. So it's like if this system is working, then each citizen is basically making sure every other citizen, when it looks to its right and its left, is like doing what it's doing too.
Something about like fulfilling your obligations as a citizen makes you more free than trying to cheat those obligations in some way. And we're going to take a look at what he means by that, I think. We're going to investigate that strand in his thought right now. There's another strand that I'm going to completely ignore, but that's equally as important, which is education. One way in which you force people to be free is by raising them in a certain way so that they have certain desires and certain capacities. And you shape them so that they have a certain nature. And they don't have a choice over that shaping because they're children when you do it. But the whole Spartan model, right? The idea of Sparta, which, by the way, if you guys want to learn about the importance of Sparta in Western thought, Bertrand Russell's chapter in the history of Western philosophy on Sparta is very interesting and very gruesome, and tells you basically how it influenced a lot of thinkers, very notably Rousseau. But the idea is you raise children from birth to have certain capacities, so that when they're adults, they're responsible and they're self-controlled, and they can handle their emotions and passions, and they can resist, the desires of the flesh or whatnot to pursue higher order interests, right? So that's one way in which you can interpret this. I think a different way is that we are divided creatures, and this is related, but we have appetites and we have higher order interests that, we often view when we think rationally as more important or more fundamental or more basic to our nature than those desires. Certain desires that we have feel almost like alien forces controlling us, and we want to resist them and we don't want to give in to them. And we often don't have the strength to. So, I'm skipping ahead here. Smoking, for example. A lot of, Hajar?
I was going to ask, did Rousseau's definition of freedom change when humans transitioned from a society that was driven by Rousseau to like society that was driven by Pop?
I think so. Yeah, because I think that independence and liberty are really closely associated in a discourse on marriage and equality, and I think they come apart somewhat in the social contract. But I don't want to go into that because it gets nuanced, and we'd have to do some more close readings to really peel that apart. But good question. So a lot of people don't feel free when they smoke cigarettes. You ask people, you say, "Do you want to smoke this cigarette?" They say, "Well, yes and no." Like, yes, I want to smoke this cigarette here right now, but no, I don't want to be a smoker. I wish that I could quit smoking. St. Augustine has a famous quote where he says, "Dear Lord, please make me chaste," but just not quite yet. Because, whatever. So, smoking is one of those things. For me, it's peanut butter. I actually can't even purchase peanut butter. This is an embarrassing fact about myself. I can't have peanut butter in my house because when I come home on a Friday night and it's midnight or 2 or something, and I start eating the peanut butter, it's gone by the next day and I feel ill. So I just don't even buy it. And in one sense, I want to eat that peanut butter because it tastes amazing, right? I just love how peanut butter tastes. But on the other hand, I really wish that I was a responsible enough adult to have peanut butter in my house and to eat it in moderate quantities that didn't make me feel sick. That would be really cool. But that's an ideal. Okay. So the general will gives us a capacity. It gives rise to something that didn't exist before, which is a set of duties or a set of general interests that we can now act on. And by acting on those rather than our passions or our appetites, we become free in a sense that we weren't before. We achieve moral freedom. And we're going to go back over all the stuff that I skipped because I wanted to get to the peanut butter and talk about what that means. But the idea is that once you have a community with a set of agreements, a set of terms, a set of laws that you have given yourself through your general will, you are now able to obey the general will rather than merely the particular will. And the general will didn't exist before. So before there was only particular desires and interests. Now we've given rise to a set of higher order interests and obligations, things that we can now act on and be truly human because we are resisting mere appetites and instincts, which is what animals act on. In this sense, a kind of freedom exists in society, in the state, that didn't exist before. And this freedom is higher and in some sense more human than the type of freedom that existed before. And when I force you to not smoke, or I force myself to not eat peanut butter but not buying it, I'm simply forcing myself to be free. In the same way, when we force you to follow the law, we're forcing you to abide by the general will, which is just a way of being free and of not being an animal. Similarly, it gives a standard of objectivity to society so that people that disagree can come to discover what is similar in their visions. So here's a cylinder. If I reflect a light on it from above, I can get a circle. If I reflect a light on it from the side, I get a rectangle. So A and B might be disagreeing there. A might be like, no, it's a circle. B might be, no, it's a rectangle. But when we create the general will and we come together and we have a process or a procedure for determining what the right rules and laws are, we no longer face this discrepancy. We now have sort of a vision or a way of homing in on what the objective element of the good is, so we can see that there's a cylinder rather than a rectangle or a circle. That's my attempt to get at this notion of objectivity. Basically, the general will pinpoints and determines what is right, whereas before it was indeterminate what was right. So going back, let's do some boring terminology stuff now, and some more quotes. So he has this one, which is nice. He says, "The passage from the state of nature to the civil state produces quite a remarkable change in man, for it substitutes justice for instinct in his behavior, and gives his actions a moral quality they previously lacked." So given what we just discussed, who can spin number one for us? Anyone who hasn't contributed yet today?
Just a quick question,
Yeah.
actually. What did they mean by justice? What's his definition of justice?
Good question. I don't want to cover that yet. it's determined by the general will as a perspective. But we will get into that either late today or next time. Back table. You guys are energetic today. Megan already helped, so I have 3 free riders back there. Patrick.
Wow. So I believe that the key to the general will is that like everyone has to obey it, or else it kind of falls apart. So like here you see that there's this mammalian instinct, and that would be like self-directed versus justice is something that is cohesive within society, that society stands for, so thus everyone must stand for, everyone acknowledges.
How about this idea of substituting justice for instinct? How does that relate to the discussion of freedom?
So you have freedom if everyone's acting in accordance with society versus in their own accord, which is what we see with instinct.
What about for the individual? Does the individual have freedom when they act according to instinct?
So instinct would be more appetital, as seen in the state of nature. In civilized society, you're looking at justice and you're saying that is acting in accordance with the general will, and thus acting for your own sake as well.
Right, so getting back to Jeremiah's question, what is justice? Well, the general will gives us this criterion of justice, what the just rules are. And now that we have this, by acting in accord with that, rather than with what we want to, in this very moment, we actually achieve moral freedom. We're able to give laws to ourselves that restrict ourselves from merely acting on our base animal instincts. And in this way, we are actually truly self-directed in a way that we weren't before. If you're directed merely by appetites and instincts, this is just your biology. This is just chemicals telling you, you want peanut butter, eat it, right? When you're following a law that you don't want to follow, but that you gave to yourself, a rule that comes from your rational faculty, you're directing yourself in a way that you can't and aren't when you're merely following appetite and instinct. That's what he's saying here, is that the general will gives rise to justice, and it substitutes justice for instinct, and in this way it makes you free.
Would he argue that living in a state of instinct is freedom?
I don't think so.
Interesting.
At least not moral freedom. So he distinguishes 3 kinds of freedom, as we're going to see on the next slide. It might be natural freedom. Number 2, only then, when the voice of duty replaces physical impulse and right replaces appetite, does man, who had hitherto taken only himself into account, find himself forced to act upon other principles and to consult his reason before listening to his inclinations.
I think it's just talking about like
Isabella,
higher order
sorry.
issues. That's okay. Just like higher order issues at that point once you join in a civil state.
Higher order interest?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep, so all of a sudden, we find right replacing appetite. We have the voice of duty replacing physical impulse. And number 3, and this goes to Jeremiah, what you were just asking about, do we have liberty when we're acting on mere impulse? He says, what a man loses through the social contract is his natural liberty, and an unlimited right to everything that tempts him and that he can acquire. Devin, do you want to
Yeah.
jump on this one?
I think it's like natural liberty seems to be like the Hobbesian idea. Like, so that's what you lose from the social contract. People now are impeded from doing whatever you want.
Yeah, you lose your natural your desire to act on your inclination, basically, to do whatever you want, do whatever you list in Locke's phrase. Remember, section 57 in Locke, where I said this is the most important section, read this 100 times? And Locke says, well, liberty is not, as many claim, to do what one lists. For who can be free when any other man's humor might domineer over him? So what Rousseau is saying is, okay, well, you can call doing whatever you want natural liberty. And you lose that with the social contract. But what do you gain? You gain moral and civil liberty. What he gains is civil liberty and the proprietary ownership of all he possesses. So notice